Are we good to go?
Yeah.
In that case, good morning, everyone. North and South, this is our second Cloud Friday. And what's nice about this is that we are joining Cape Town and Johannesburg at the same time. Just wanted to reiterate a little bit of what Cloud Fridays is all about. So just very quickly, we'll talk about why Cloud Friday. We'll talk about timing and logistics. And what Cloud Friday is about for us, I'm trying to avoid the echo, is an ongoing community. You guys would have seen there's a team invite for those of you who were here last month, and you would have been added to the team. If you'd like to be added to that team moving forward, then we'll do that with pleasure. These sessions are being recorded, as well as there are channels that have been established inside the team so that if you want to ask a comment live or after the fact, then you can do that. Why are we doing Cloud Fridays the way that we are? Well, there's a little bit of selfishness involved, especially from my side, because I don't want to go anywhere at night. So Cloud Fridays is nice because it's business hours, it's on a Friday, you get time off from the office, tell the boss you're doing something meaningful, and you actually are. And there's education involved, right? So you're getting educated for free as well as participating in the Azure community. And again, this community is both North and South, Cape Town and Johannesburg. Let's just talk about logistics really quickly. So emergency exit, there's the door. That's really important. So if there's a smoke or fire in here, then you know where to go. And Johannesburg, I'm going to think that if you look behind you, you should see a door, and that's also really important. Toilets, you should know where those are. Smoking happens at the end of every session. So in Joburg, follow Alistair. Who smokes in this room? Okay. So we know who to follow. And coffee, tea, and lunch is provided. So I must warn you, the food here is relatively generous. So you won't go hungry. You won't go thirsty. Let's talk about today's program. Go on.
Before we jump into that, Nick, just a couple of things. For those that have registered, if you go to cloudfridays.co.za, that's where you'll find information about the events that have passed and the current event and future events. If you've registered there, is that the email address that we need to use to invite you to the team? I think that's the biggest question, because people will register with a Gmail account and you don't use that as your team's account. So what we did with last month's event is everyone that registered last month would have been added to the team, the Cloud Fridays team, which is where we're going to be sharing all the content this month. So you'll get all the slides this month. You'll also get the recordings this month. And we have to admit people into the lobby, but we'll fix that next month. And really the idea behind not only Cloud Fridays, but also the other initiatives that get people together, like Community Night. And that happens on the second Tuesday of every month. Yeah, there's 8 or 9 communities that meet. And what we're doing with this, and like Nick said, selfishly, part of what we're trying to achieve is we want to make it possible for everyone to participate in community, as well as if you can't be here, you can still consume the information later. So we know that Community Night starts at 4 p.m. in the afternoon and it runs to 10 p.m. in the evening. The problem with that is certain people say they can't make it at 4 because they're still working, or they can't make it at 6:30 because they have families. And we don't want the community to lose out because you can't physically get here, which is one of the reasons why we're using Teams, because the conversation doesn't stop and start at Community Night or stop and start at an event like this. We want to practice learning through sharing. We also want to build communities of practice so that if you have a question or you have a scenario, there's not just people that are standing in front of you right now, but you can talk amongst each other, and you might find that, hey, where's Winston? There's Winston. Winston's got a problem with Windows Hello and some public key stuff. And he's asked us that question. And chances are, when we start looking at crowdsourcing, where there's a bunch of people communicating, he can post his question and you'll get an answer much faster than waiting for, and Warren's not here, for Warren to reply to a WhatsApp. But that's really the idea behind what we're doing. And everyone in the room is a guinea pig to see how well this works for us to communicate with Cape Town as well. And this is the second month. And we're going to do a lot more than just Azure. We're moving into Teams Tuesdays now as well, which will happen on the second Tuesday of every month, just before Community Night from 9 to 1. because our world is not just limited to Azure. We work in the cloud. And when we start talking about concepts like Microsoft 365, Azure is part and parcel of that when it comes to identity management, enterprise mobility and security. And this is really, if this works, great. I know we've got quite a few people dialed in from wherever they are in the country or in the world, and that's really my take home, because we've got people in the room. You now know the type of conversations we're going to be having. And also, if you can't make it, don't feel bad, just dial in. And if you can't make it on the day, the recording, and disclaimer, there's no external access or guest access to Microsoft Stream. So even though we're using Stream to record this, we will download the sessions and then upload it to YouTube and put the link into Teams so that you can still watch it or you can share it with your colleagues. All right. Okay, Nick, that's all I wanted to say.
Stunning, Al. Thank you. So today we are attempting. Do you want to say something?
No, I said sometimes I do add value.
That comment wasn't one of them. So today we are going to attempt to go through 4 of these chapters. Now, we are quite willing to sacrifice a topic in terms of timing if we go deep somewhere and the audience is super interested in something. Okay. So while we've got this and we've got SlideWeb ready, if you guys want to spend 45 minutes talking on resource groups, then we can, right? So today we'll talk about the core architectural components, the core products available in Azure, the solutions in Azure, and the management tools. And if this looks like Azure fundamentals, that's because it is. And what we've done is we've shamelessly followed the Azure core curriculum for Azure fundamentals. However, we have strapped ourselves in front of it and allowed the audience to steer this to wherever you guys want to go. So last week, for example, we had a continuous integration demo that warranted just because somebody asked the question, said, I want to see stuff in a container. Could you show us? And so we did. So the spirit behind this is to be as restricted as possible and show as much value as we can and to avoid echo. Right, that is the end of my deck. So I'm going to ask Alistair to start presenting on his side because he's got some pretty slides.
Okay, all right, let's just do that and go back here and do that. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
I have to hit the share button. That always helps. Now you can.
Yeah, we can see that. Can everyone see that well?
Just one more thing. This is for the community, by the community. We've got new speakers this month, and we'd encourage you, if you want to present to people, have a conversation with people, please put your hand up. Drop us a note in the team. We'd love for you to present not only at Cloud Fridays, but on any topic at any community that we are involved in. Cool. All right. So Nick put together quite a bit of the collateral, and then I made it pretty because that's what I do. Nick's the brains. Nick's the brawn because he's quite. You did a CrossFit thing this morning, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, before you got here. That's commitment.
Or lack of brains.
Lack of brains. All right. So let's just run through a few things when we start talking about architectural components for Azure. And Nick, when I pause for longer than 5.5 seconds, that's when you need to speak.
Or ignore you, but yes.
All right. Okay. So like Nick said earlier on, we're following, I think, what is it? It's MS900, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's MS900. It's the Azure Fundamentals.
Yeah. So if anyone's interested in writing that exam, no, this will not help you pass that exam. So please don't hold us responsible if you get 679 out of 900 or 1,000 and you're supposed to get 700. This is not official curriculum that's going to help you pass. I think like all YouTubers where you talk about a product and you say this is not sponsored by the product, but by the company that makes the product. The food sponsored by Microsoft. This is not Microsoft official curriculum. This will not guarantee that you pass MS 900. Our suggestion is still to go have a look at what's available on Microsoft Learning. And this is really just to assist you with core concepts around Azure and Azure fundamentals. So in today's session, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to talk about Azure Regions, what a region is, what availability zones are, or AZs, and not to be confused with what AWS calls availability zones. I think that's important for anyone that's touching AWS infrastructure as well, because we're a cloud-native, multi-cloud rainbow nation, and I think you'll see it more in South Africa than you'll see it in any other place in the world. We're also going to be talking about resource groups, and then we're going to touch a bit on the resource manager and the benefits of the way Azure is built. Your turn, Nick. I'll click through the slides.
All right. You want to go through, click through the next one? I actually don't know what, is there all? Yes, that's pretty. Okay.
I know, it's prettier than the one you had.
You know, this is starting to sound an awful lot like the conversations I have at home when my wife says, are you going to go out wearing that t-shirt? So one of the largest networks in the world, that's actually not true. Depending on the day of the week, it is the largest network in the world. And something that we want to take into account when we build things on Azure is that Microsoft, at their expense, wants the traffic to come towards Azure. Now, this is super important when you architect things, and we'll talk a little bit. Matt, are you talking about networking in front door and that type of thing? So Matt's nodding, right. Now, what that means is he'll talk to you about the things like cold potato routing and hot potato routing and why that is so special. There's a lot of emphasis on the Microsoft network to bring the traffic onto the Azure front door somewhere, and then to route it to the correct location at Microsoft's expense. Now, you'll also notice this in the costing. Ingress into Azure is free in terms of traffic. You pay for traffic that leaves Azure, right? So when we do our costing in terms of how much internet bandwidth do I need, how much express route bandwidth do I need, you need to consider how much traffic is leaving Azure back towards you. So you'll have the gateway cost for whatever that relative gateway is, as well as the actual egress traffic that leaves, which for a modern application is actually the minority of the traffic as opposed to the majority of the traffic, right? So you'll see that we've got some peering sites, only about 8,000 of them. Now, again, if you peer with an ISP, there's a hard peer, so fiber actually plugging into the Microsoft network, and soft peers. Microsoft has both. 138 sites. Go on.
Nick, just explain peering for people that don't know what peering is.
So in South Africa, all of us, every single day, use a thing called NAP Africa. Okay. Now, what NAP Africa does is advertise the shortest possible route to get to Netflix, to get to the content of your choice via your ISP. Now, that is called peering. There can be, like I said, a soft peer or a hard peer. And what peering makes available, and thanks for the question, Alistair, is to us, the consumer, how do I get to where I want to be, which could be MSN, could be the news site I want to go to, or very importantly, at 8 o'clock at night, Netflix. How do I get there in the shortest possible manner via a network?
So just on that, when you look at your ISPs, so you go through OpenServe or you go to AfriHost and they've got 12 fiber providers and 47 DSL providers. Well, I don't know if we still talk about ADSL. But what these providers do, they all have their own infrastructure, and the peering is literally connectivity between your ISPs. So if I want to visit a website that's hosted with MTN and I am using OpenServe, it doesn't go outside and then come back in if there's network peering. It goes straight. And when they start talking about 8,000 plus ISP sessions with peering groups and all of that, it is the fastest route. So everyone that uses Waze, same concept. The network goes, how can I get there fastest? And there's a logical mapping of that. Now in South Africa, I know there's been a lot of noise about CCOM saying that there's certain ISPs that have been chopped from peering. Just be wary of that when you make the decision to go with an ISP. When you are moving to Azure, it's not like in the old days, you had a data center in your building and you had a data center in Cape Town and someone connected a lease line between you onto the back of the site's backbone, which is telecom, and then got to that building. So it was a direct one-to-one. Be wary of when you start architecting your network and your geolocation and your regions and all of that, that the infrastructure provided by your service provider is good and that there has peering, because people will go, I can't stream Netflix fast enough, I can't get UHD. I'm one of those people because my service provider doesn't cache Netflix locally. There is a service provider, a fiber provider that caches Netflix. So if you've got a 4K TV and you've got a premium subscription to Netflix and the UHD tab doesn't come up there, it's not because you don't have access to it or your line's not fast enough. Chances are in South Africa it's not being cached. So be wary of these considerations when you choose a service provider outside of going to stuff like ExpressRoute, which Nick will talk on now, but understand the implications because milliseconds are important.
Let's just talk.
Explain soft versus hardware. I assume it's virtual versus hardware.
No, it's a wonderful question. So we had a question in the audience that says, can we explain soft peering versus hard peering? So if you've ever done a trace route, okay, and you trace route to anything on the Microsoft network, you start looking for names like star.msn.com. Okay, so the first ping outward will be your router, then it's to the edge of your ISP, and then depends on how they've done the peering, there's either many hops or few hops to get onto the Microsoft network. Now, if they've peered either a hard peer or soft peer, and I'll tell you the difference now, the route should be very short, like 1, 2, 3 hops. I've been at a banking customer and they complained about the performance of Office 365. They said, this product is terrible. It is slow. And you can't argue with physics, right? So if something appears slow, let's do a trace route. It took them 15 hops to get onto the Microsoft network. And I said, your ISP has got a peering issue. I said, that's a load of rubbish. We pay millions of rand every month for this bandwidth. Sound familiar? Okay. Then I put up a hotspot on my phone and I said, look, not affiliated to this network provider. Let's just do a comparative test. 1, 2, third hop. I was on star.msn.com and they said, oh, we understand. Okay. So the difference between a hard peer and a soft peer. A hard peer is your ISP has physically got a fiber cable plugged into the Microsoft network. Okay, so your ISP and Microsoft have a physical understanding, some money changes hands, and you as the customer then benefit from that. A soft peer would be your ISP has an understanding with NAP Africa. Okay, so there's a logical association that says, if you're going to send this type of traffic around, where should it go? And they'll do an advertising thing in TCP terms, and it says, oh, you need to go to Terrico, one of the two, depending on where you are, and the traffic will follow the shortest possible route. Okay. We also have 130 plus edge sites, but that's confusing because we've got 56 Azure regions, right? So what does that mean? And we'll talk about regions in a second, but think about, and this is a little bit inaccurate, but think of a region as a data center. So it's 56 of them roughly in the world. But there's 130 edge sites, which means that Microsoft has put down a physical Microsoft point of presence in a country or several in a country. So in Africa, for example, we've got way more dots in terms of edge sites than we have regions. We only see 2. Okay. And the point to that is, again, what is the shortest possible route to get the traffic onto the Microsoft network? And I cannot emphasize enough how staggering the investment is in this network. We'll talk about ExpressRoute in a second, but ExpressRoute effectively allows you to have a private network connection, you as the customer having fiber directly into this network. Okay, but we'll unpack that. And there's 44 of those locations around the world, which kind of makes you think that you can do MPLS cheaper over the Microsoft network than you can with another provider. And if you were thinking that, you would be right. and just leave that thought hanging there, creates attention. And this number has increased again, 33,000 miles of fiber and more. So what does this mean in terms of paths? The pathing thing, the only thing that we care about, like we're in the Horn of Africa, so if you see, there's multiple blue lines. If we lose a cable, we're okay. There are multiple routes. And so the takeaway from the rest of the slide is that there's huge amounts of redundancy. And I had an example in Scandinavia, and this is also the same network that services Office 365, by the way. So one of the slides that I presented, I got to present on an outage that happened in Scandinavia in Exchange Online. And they failed over 70 racks of Exchange servers transparently via another fiber path, and nobody knew. There was zero impact to the customer. So just about the network, and there's a bunch of companies who want to sell you services about what could happen if you lose services. The chances are slim that you lose services based on a network outage.
Yeah, you chances of you losing service because someone updated DNS records inside of Azure, and then you can't get to somewhere, not because then there's no fiber, but because someone rode over a network cable with a chair like in the old days. That's more likely to happen than fiber falling over. And with CCOM and everyone else pulling more fiber, we know that they're busy rolling out at 1 terabit fiber between Cape Town and Joburg. So it's only going to become more robust. And when Cape Town wakes up and actually rolls out all the services into the local data center there, they might be able to enjoy what we enjoy in Johannesburg.
Alistair, we have a question.
Sorry, what?
We have a question from the audience, so just give it a second.
No.
Just to let you know, okay, we've got Cape Town, we've got Joburg. Okay?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Cape Town is now currently our least for Joburg, all I understand it. So what you basically explaining to me about in Africa with all the fiber lines running, we've got all our unfortunate fiber cables. So just for me to understand my logic right. So Cape Town and Joburg should fall over. We will not see that impact with onto the other fiber connectivities in Africa.
Depends on where your workload is. Okay.
So
if your workload is in Joburg and we lose Joburg, Kuburg blows up and becomes Santon by the Sea. There's not much we can do there in terms of redundancy. Or let's assume that Alistair has a massive revolt about SharePoint Online, dresses in a red tracksuit, takes to the streets, which has never happened before. And they take down Joburg, okay, and all power goes out. We're okay because we've got other redundant routes within the country as well as going out of the country. So even if you lose power to an entire region like Joburg, from a network path point of view, you're okay, as well as the workloads in Joburg will fail over onto Cape Town. Now, if you're a Cape Town customer, Microsoft will whitelist you under circumstances to run your stuff locally in Cape Town, so you're not just a DR region. That also means if Cape Town goes off the map, your workloads will fail over onto Joburg, okay? And the network paths will follow.
So just on that.
There is a star here in terms of where does your express route terminate, okay? But that's a redundancy question. So if you only have your physical express route in Cape Town and we lose Cape Town for whatever reason, Santon by the Sea, Cuba goes up, then that physical thing is gone. So if you didn't plan for a redundant circuit in Johannesburg, then you as a customer will be impacted because of the physical network path.
Please, I need to get this in my mind. However, when we put up stuff in Microsoft Cloud, the relevant of which cloud we use per se. In the 365 Microsoft guarantee that there is a redundancy.
Yes.
So it's okay uncle, let us say redundancy of my security is
Okay, so I think what we want to do is I want to answer this very softly by saying, because I don't want to steal the thunder from the third session. It depends on how you've built your stuff. Okay, and so we've got IaaS, we've got SaaS, and PaaS. Okay, if you built your stuff with a preference on SaaS and PaaS, most of the DON failover is super transparent for you. If you're building stuff on VMs, you need to architect the redundancy as well, in terms of storage, in terms of VM location, all the type of thing. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Look, I think it's important to note that as much as a lot of redundancy built into networks fail. So yes, Microsoft continually says that. Is there an echo somewhere?
I think we've just resolved it.
So Microsoft does say that they're highly resilient and they almost, if you look at the Uptime Institute, they're almost at 4 nines for a lot of the services, or 5 nines for a lot of the services. But like Nick said, you have to make sure. So think about it this way, right? Here's a perfect analogy. You move into a new house and you have internet in the house and you've got one router with 5 aerials on it. And then in the morning when you go take a shower, before you get in there, you go to the bathroom and now you want to consume Instagram while you're making a poo. And there's a dead zone in the bathroom. That's exact. And so what do? You go back to Matrix Warehouse or to Incredible and they sell you this mesh network, these new routers, right? So that there's no failover. It's like MPLS, but the new version of MPLS. It's the same for Azure and the Microsoft Cloud Service. So yes, they do provide highly resilient environments. If there are catastrophic failures, there's not much you can do. If Cape Town blows up and it becomes Sandton-on-Sea and Joburg, someone cuts the fiber cable because they're grading roads. If we go down as 2 regions go down, I do not know if they are failing over automatically to another region or another zone in another country, in another data center. Now, in the third session, they're going to talk about how to bulletproof your resiliency when it comes to stuff. So multi-geo and all of those things, geolocation and all of that, it comes at price. What it's important to note is, just because you're in the cloud doesn't mean that the stuff that happened to you inside of your data center in your building, like PR, like high availability, is eradicated. Same with backup. People think moving to the cloud, they don't have to backup. You still need to backup. How you do it becomes different. Yeah? We good? All right, Nick, let's go to the next slide.
Yep, and we need to compress the next couple of slides for the sake of time. So if we could not deep dive and just skim through the next slides, but with enough respect to the material.
All right. So when we start talking about all these cool terms, AZs and regions and multi-zones and all of those things, when we start talking about what a region is, and this differs based on the cloud service provider that you talk to. Google's got a different version of this, so does AWS and Microsoft. AWS will tell you they have the most AZs across the world, and that's their claim to fame. Their definition of an AZ is very different to what Microsoft's definition of a availability zone is. So region, easy thing, Joburg, Cape Town, 2 regions, right? And Nick, keep me honest here. Mm-hmm. So when we look at regions, and if we go back to the slide, you'll notice that there are different regions across the world, and you'll notice we've got 2. What we're missing here is the regions that have been deployed to Dubai. And there's more regions coming up in Europe as well. There's this big hole in the top right-hand corner called Russia. But I don't know my geography. But yeah, we don't know if anything's going to go on in there. If they're going to drop one in the Siberian wilderness or whatever. It's the same with Canada. Look at that. North America doesn't have much going on either. So when we start talking about the layout of your data center, because that's really what it is, so region would be the data center, right? Okay, so there's this building the size of a football field, American football field, not a South African football field, and they've got I wouldn't say thousands of racks, but they've got enough racks in the building to power a small city, right? And it needs power and all of that. So when you start thinking of regions, it's a really, 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 really big data center. We've all seen data centers from the likes of BCX has got quite a few, so does EOH, so does Dimension Data, and they all have that. That's pretty much it, a little bit more highly resilient. What we don't have in South Africa is a tier, I think it's either tier 5 or tier 1, I never know which way it goes. But in order to qualify for that, one of the reasons why it took so long for us to get these DCs is because we've only got one power company giving us power. And Microsoft in most countries have two, so it doesn't fail over. So when you look at how BCX architected their data centers, they actually across the highway, and that's run on two separate municipal grids. So load shedding won't happen to the same municipal grid at the same time. And that's why their claim to fame has always been a plus at the end of the number. Now, when we start looking at availability zones, it's exactly that. It's what's available inside of the region. Now, and I don't know if they're going to do it in session 3, but you can actually decide which rack you're on, in which chassis, in which location inside of the data center. Everything costs money. It's like upgrading an Audi. It's the same thing, right? So if you are really pedantic about high availability and failover, so think about how vMotion works inside of VMware, where all of a sudden you've got two nodes for two chassis, you've got node 1 and node 2, and all of a sudden because of usage, vMotion moves all your virtual machines onto node 2, and node 1's doing nothing. So think about availability zones and what you can do with that in that sort of context.
Just to add to that,
yeah.
It's part of the reason why in the portal, you'll see that we don't have zone redundant storage, because we don't have a zone in South Africa yet. So we have a geography because we have north and south, we're within the same country, but we don't have zone redundant storage. So we can't survive a complete outage of 2 data centers because we need a third one. Well, actually, there are more than 2 data centers. If we look at zone redundant storage, a lot of stuff gets written not 3 times, but 6 times, and it's completely transparent to you. And the biggest reason is because we don't have that third set yet.
But that's interesting. I was actually going to ask. So it's written 6 times, not 3 times.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're doing a locally redundant storage, it's written 3 times. If it's GRS, then it's globally redundant storage. So in theory, you can survive the outage of a geography. And so we don't have that in this country yet.
Yeah. So when you look at the map again and you look at the US, when you look at the geography, they've got east and west coast. And a lot of organizations will fail over from one region to another, or geographical region. You can, when you're dealing with larger organizations, based on stuff like data sovereignty laws and things like that, you can actually store your content locally so it can reside. Your data residency policies are adhered to, because let's say we are sharing a company with the US. Data for people that work in the US stays in the US. Data that for people that work in South Africa stays in South Africa. You can actually split that. So don't think that when you go spin up your portal in Azure that you're limited to only provisioning resources in the region that you've created the portal in. Okay? So and you can actually configure multi-geo.
If you look at that dot in the UK, that 1 dot is actually 6 dots, not 1 dot.
But the UK is going to be cut off from the rest of the world as soon as they don't do the Brexit thing.
And the same thing in Australia. Australia is actually 5 dots, not 2 dots. So in Australia, you can do zone redundant. In the UK, you can do zone redundant. In Dubai, you can't because there's only 2. And in Germany, you can't because there's only 2. And in the States, there's many. And in Europe, actually, there's many. So like Alistair says, depending on how you architect this, you can choose where your data resides and how redundant it needs to be.
Okay, let's move on. We've spoken through this.
Yep.
And we've spoken through not that because the slides were boring and I added a gratuitous slide. And we've spoken about this, so we're doing well for time, Nick.
Yep.
Let's delve into Resource Manager. You want to take this one?
Okay. So a way to think about this, if we saw Azure version 1 and that portal that we had, it was not so awesome because it was effectively a representation of somebody else's data center. Okay. What we have in the new portal, and we forget there's a classic portal, we have an ARM portal. So ARM stands for Azure Resource Manager. And the nice thing in this portal is that the portal gives us a view of actually an object. And everything in Azure is an object that has properties, descriptions, can be managed by itself. Okay. Now, what we have with Azure Resource Manager as well is we have the concept of grouping these objects together into logical constructs, and we can then administrate those separately. Now, you'll see at the top, there's a whole bunch of arrows. So I've got Azure Portal, I've got PowerShell, I've got CLI, which is Command Line Interface, and I've got a REST API, and I've got various SDKs. The point to that is whatever I can do in Portal, I can do through another mechanism as well. So I can do it in PowerShell, I can do it programmatically via REST API, I can create objects, I can interrogate objects, I can interface with those objects. So in this model, I'm not limited to a representation of another data center. I can talk to a disk in terms of what it is as a disk, but I can also attach to the API and say, tell me about the disk. How big is it? How full is it? Who's got permission to it? Show me what I am able to do with this disk. Is it a read-only disk? Okay, so all these descriptors are built into that model.
So think about it this way. When we start talking about the Resource Manager, it's a container. So for those who enjoy suites, you've got these jars sitting at home. You can put different suites in there. You can put Spizzers, you can put bubblegum in there, the same thing. But it's grouped by the container. So when you work with a Resource Manager, you create resource groups, understand that it's a grouping of services that are available to you inside of Azure. And generally, that's where it starts. Well, before you get into networking, most things starts with a resource group, because invariably it becomes very confusing. And you start spinning up things, and all of a sudden, Azure creates all these things, and they create multiple resources, and architecturally, it becomes a mess. But always come back to the founding principle that a resource group is a collection, it's a container, not a Kubernetes container or one of those sort of Docker container type things. It's same principle, but it's a logical grouping of services and platforms inside of Azure. So always go back to your resource manager and go look at your resource group. It's more than 5 seconds, Nick.
Yeah, I'm waiting for you to move to the next slide. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So if we pause for 10 seconds, then I have to click the button. Okay.
Next time I'll be more verbal. Yeah, Matthew has just determined that he's going to be my beeper. So why do we care about Resource Manager versus the old model? And for me, so I'm going to talk to the slide, not go through every single bullet point. As customers become more mature, redeployability, big funny term, reusability of design, reusability of code, reusability of configuration becomes a really big deal. Now, very quickly, that means that you can have a sandbox that you play in, let's call that dev, something that you kick the tires in, call that QA, and something that you actually do your live stuff in, called live. Now, in the data center world, lab tends to be live, right?
That's where we run production.
That's where we run production, right? So we lab in live, and we POC in live. Well, in Azure, what this model allows us to do is create the objects and the configuration as it would be, test it through various cycles, and then take that identical configuration, maybe change the presentation in terms of what network it attaches to, what the DNS name is, and deploy it into live. So reusability is massive. it allows us also to manage using a single management paradigm. So if you guys are script heavy, it's scripts. If it's CLI, it's CLI. If it's bash, it's bash. If it's PowerShell, it's PowerShell. If it's Portal, it's Portal. If it's a GitHub repository that you version control, promote the code into live and publish, it's that. It's all of those. So what this model gives you, besides the pretty GUI where the blades snap open as you scroll through your resources, is the reusability of configuration. And that's one of the things that we miss the quickest when we deploy things in the resource manager, because it's like, I see properties, I see stuff, okay? But the point is that I can take that configuration, I can export it into a template, I can edit it, I can reuse it, I can even have Matthew do something in his subscription, build a configuration for me, export it, I can import it into my subscription, look like a hero. Now, there's formalized methods around that Microsoft has published, like Azure Lighthouse, that we're not going to touch on today. However, that means that a service provider can publish something directly into your subscription on the basis of they have a reusable something that can work. So this is my beginning of the dramatic 5-second pause.
Did it work?
Yeah. Splendid. So let's talk about scope. Now, we are immersed in something at the moment called the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. Now, this is very well documented. It's like 100 million pages of stuff to read. But ultimately what it boils down to is when we manage something in Azure, we can be as granular as you need to be. Now, very often we think the subscription is the beginning and the end of everything inside the Azure portal, and it isn't. I spoke earlier, for example, that we could have dev, QA, and live. Those could be 3 subscriptions, but who owns them, right? And how do I nest those? Well, this is where we have a management group. So a management group is an object that can have multiple management groups in it. So think of it as business unit orientated or geography orientated or politically orientated, however you need to split up your subscription. Underneath are one-to-many subscriptions. Underneath are one-to-many resource groups. Within those resource groups are your things, your stuff, your applications. So think of a resource group as the HR application, the disks, the VMs, the containers, the websites, the SQL servers, or the SQL databases that make up that application. That belongs in the resource group called HR. That belongs in a subscription called Live. No ambiguity there, right? And that is maybe in the management group called Africa, because that is where that cost center is managed out of. So in this model, we're not just creating stuff, we're creating stuff that can be well organized. Now, the caveat to this is that we think about this before we create all this stuff, okay? Also, as opposed to, I have my Amazon customers like to complain about this stuff. It's a little bit of, I'm not sure if I've deleted everything, right? Now, if you delete a resource group and everything in it, you've deleted the resource group and everything in it. There's no ambiguity. There's no orphan disks or SQL or stuff anyway. So this cascading level of management works both ways. So it works from a resource organization point of view, it works from a political boundary, a security boundary, management boundary, and a deletion boundary.
Just
Alistair,
on that, very, just a rule of thumb, when you delete a resource group because you think it's not serving any purpose, go check the size. That would kind of help you decide. If it's tiny, it's 1 gig, 2 gigs, okay, you can delete it, right? That's also why it specifically says fill in the resource group name that you want to delete after you've said delete, even though you've selected the resource group to delete, because Microsoft wants to make sure that you know what you're doing. We've actually had a customer delete 60 terabytes. Okay? And then it replicated back down to the store simple environment, and it deleted locally as well. You can't go back to Microsoft and say, hey, please restore, though you can, but think about it. Rule of thumb, look at the size of what you're deleting, not just the word resource, whatever you call your resource group. Look at the size. If there's a lot of content in there, the size is big, you can find out why you're deleting it and get someone with the right approval levels to sign off a document that says that it indemnifies you from any data loss if you hit the delete button. All right. There we go. You can finish up, Nick.
Okay. So if we put this stuff all together, and why are we doing these sessions in the first place? Is it so that we as customers and as service providers know what is available in Azure. And this was a super light. What objects go where? How can we organize them? So putting this all together gives us the redundancy story. We understand that Azure is massively redundant. We understand there's a country component to Azure, a region component, a network component. Now, all of this boils up to availability if we plan for that. So we can, for example, deploy our virtual machines on purpose into an availability zone that we designed for, or there can be islands of availability. So if something goes down, well, it goes down. If I've built it into an availability zone, if something goes down, what I need to stay up will stay up. So I'm preemptively planning for things like a rack failure inside a Microsoft data center because I can. We've spoken about resource groups, and ideally the model that we want to learn about and we want to embrace is this concept of the Azure resource model. A resource is an object, a disk is an object, like I said, a virtual machine, a data lake is an object. So we can consider that we want to access the contents, but we can also manage the objects themselves. Now, if I look at what I'm able to do with other cloud providers, very often it's a case, well, I open the storage console, then I open the network console, then I open the VMware console, and there's so many touch points. In this model, I have one touch point, I have one language, I have one shell, and inside of all of them, I can do whatever I need to do. So my guys who love scripting can script their hearts out. People who have a DevOps story can originate and manage entirely within a DevOps story. So I'm going to point to Neil in the back of the room because he's absolutely awesome at that. And we as infrastructure people take lessons from our brethren in the dev community because DevOps there is massively mature, and we as infrastructure people are still embracing that as a discipline. But when we consider that absolutely everything is an object that can be described and contained and managed, then DevOps becomes very real in the infrastructure paradigm.
So just be wary that even though Microsoft provides you with all these cool things, right? Oh, look, I can spin something up and it runs, and I can shut it down and it will run forever and all of those things. That you have to make sure that we're talking about architecture, that you architect it in the right way. Now think about it this way, right? If you are in Office 365, your mail's there and runs. You hit the delete button, you delete the mail. And for the most part, the redundancy for that mail in Office 365 is provided to you by Microsoft. When you create a resource group with services inside of Azure, it doesn't mean that it's going to be redundant, because you have to still build in the resiliency, the redundancy, and the high availability when you architect stuff in Azure. So be very wary of that. Yes, it's cool and it works, and for the most part it runs, but you still have to worry about high availability and failover, and you need to make sure that you adhere to those sort of constructs architecturally when you architect or blueprint your Azure environment. Is that it, Nick? It's the last slide.
Let's talk time management for a second.
All right. Well, there's latecomers though, so I don't know if about time management. People showed up. I thought that maybe these people are from Cape Town that showed up. But there's
our Cape Town people arrived before your Joburg people.
Well, they just sat down while everyone's going to walk out now. So.
Shall we reconvene the second session at past?
That's always been the plan.
Okay, so for those of you dialing in, is the plan that we're going to go to, and Alistair, I'm going to ask you this, are we going to go to the second session, or are we keeping this one alive?
Is everyone happy with what we've covered? Yeah, we're good. We understand some core architectural fundamentals. Thank you, Frank. Great. I saw you dialed in via your phone on your way here, right? Yes. Okay. All right. Yeah, we're good to move on to the next one.
Cool. All right. So then we're going to drop this session and we'll dial into the second one in 8 minutes.
Hold on. But then everyone else has to dial in. We might as well just keep this open then.
Okay, let's do that.
Because I can stop the recording and start the recording again.
Sure. Then let's keep this one open. Very happy with that.
I'm going to stop the recording and it will. There we go.